So we recently got an unexpected new Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list update the other day that banned a handful of problematic cards in the game right now. I don't think it's an understatement
Weird,
to say
but yeah.
that all these cards are pretty welcome bans in the eyes of most competitive players. They've all been pretty relevant on and off in the game for the last few years, and so most people won't be sad to see them go, myself included. That said, if you look through comments online or maybe even from some of your own local players, there are some dissenters who actually disagree with these bans. And one of the reasons I've seen mentioned the most is that they claim these cards were good options that actually kept the powerful meta decks in check. In their estimation,
I mean, yeah, that's what stun cards are for, honestly. But at the exact same time, a lot of people see it as toxic. But at the exact same time, considering what you're gonna have to go against, can you really blame them for using something that, you know, most people wouldn't even hesitate to use against much more serious players? Like, is that even a surprise?
something like Dimensional Barrier, for instance, was a strong card that you could use to counter a powerful deck like Mitsurugi, Ryzeal, Yummy, or Branded that had a primary summoning mechanic. Or maybe they like using cards like Fossil Dyna and the Barrier statues in a dedicated stun deck that's just meant to shut down the opposition entirely. So
What was it? Let me just rewind a little bit. Fossil Dyna was such a old school, you know, meh card. A lot of people tend to not forget its flip effect, and for the most part, just people summon it to, you know, stop you from playing. But it was such a niche card, you had to use like certain other cards just to make sure it worked. And in some cases, it didn't work. As for the barrier statues, that one still confuses me. I mean, ever since the whole wind statue that they used in Floowandereeze, everyone's been experimenting with the other statues. Which is crazy considering a lot of people stated that those things were ass until some deck decided to use them, and all of a sudden, wow, instant lockdown. Neat.
The barrier statues in a dedicated stun deck that's just meant to shut down the opposition entirely. So in that context, a lot of these cards getting banned is a huge blow. And it actually follows the recent banning and limiting of several other Floodgate cards over the last couple of years. Skill Drain, Summon Limit, Goes and Match, Rivalry, There Can Be Only One, Anti-Spell Fragrance, and so on.
Yeah, most of them I agree on. Albeit for Skill Drain and Anti-Spell Fragrance, kind of don't see the point. Like, yeah, Skill Drain is bad, but at least it's kind of like counterable via the graveyard effects. On the other hand, something like Anti-Spell Fragrance, most of the times you rarely use magic cards, and even then you'd usually set them on the field. Or with something like Blue Eyes, you just bypass the entirety of it, and it's like, oh, set there immediately, and since it's already set, hello, I'm just gonna use it. It's weird, but yeah, I can see it, I suppose. It's a weird little niche, I guess.
To be clear, I'm pretty happy to see a lot of these cards go myself, but even though I don't entirely agree with the opposing sentiment, I'm a pretty firm believer that everyone's entitled to their opinions about the balance of the game and the decks and the cards in them. And I'd even go as far as to say, I think the stun deck as a category has the right to exist in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Stun decks, if we had to put it very broadly, is basically the cheap man's way of competing with other decks. Because unfortunately, a lot of them competitive decks just have so many cards and workarounds, you have to play these toxic cards. An excellent example for this would be something like Mystic Mind. It was like ridiculously bonkers, and a lot of people played it because, hey, it's a free win against most decks that have like swarmed monsters. And unless they have like a singular spell trap negate or like multiple, chances are someone might actually have a second Mystic Mind ready to go. Or just something, other cards that just allow for you to bypass the entirety of the thing. On the sense, yeah, they are kind of bad, but honestly I prefer stun decks because at the very least you have to work around things and use your own resources to bypass them. Cards that I, for example, use like Twin Twister, Mystical Space Typhoon, and whatnot, Harpy's Feather Duster, I don't mind using them, but most meta players don't use them because, you know, they expect hand traps, magic cards, spell traps, and something like that. You know, the nonsense. these are kind of like board breakers or something like that in a sense. Yeah, it's kind of terrible that you have to rely on these types of strategies, but at the exact same time, again, can you blame them? The amount of expensive cards that are like nowadays is just ridiculous. At this point, it's better to just make amends and just play the toxic, not really toxic, just somewhat bland and boring Stunlock decks. Or just play them, as intended with some proper, shenanigans on top. Like, for example, with Runix, I like playing Zarkin there with some counter battle cards, mainly because it's funny to see them try to beat through my Runic monsters and everything else. And I am at least working around a goal of decking them out. It's not exactly the best, but at the very least I'm working towards a goal to beat them somehow, which is better than nothing. Just saying.
Sort of. It's complicated. We'll get there. Just stick with me. So instead of just making another reactionary ban list video, I wanted to dig a bit deeper and talk about all these so-called stun cards as a whole. Their history, their place in Yu-Gi-Oh!, and how it's evolved over the years to get where they are today. Right, so let's start with the origins of the stun deck. You'll sometimes hear people split decks into these broad categories like aggro, control, and mid-range. The aggro deck moves fast and tries to...
I've never heard aggro in mid-range. Control, yeah, it's basically control the field, control the area, and control the duel. Aggro in midfield? That's an interesting one.
Overwhelm you with monsters and attacks. The control deck slows...
Wait, so aggro is just OTK? Then again, he did say overwhelming with monsters, so not really... No, it's still OTK because you're basically just excluding, not focusing on one powerful monster, but multiple monsters to beat your opponent.
Slows down the pace and then wins by building resources over time, and the mid-range deck is flexible and exists somewhere in between. Honestly, I don't think that...
Oh, so it's kind of like a combination of the two. Okay.
Perfectly to Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially these days, but that's a talk for another video. We've got the basic gist, so we'll go with it. Now, what exactly is a stun deck and where does it fall on the spectrum? We've all seen it at one point or another. The deck where they normal summon a single monster with a strong, debilitating effect. Fossil Dyna, Inspector Border, a barrier statue, etc.
Yeah, wait, isn't Inspector Border still unlimited, I think? Come to think of it, yeah, that's still an effective card nowadays. So I guess Fossil Dyna is exchanged for Inspector Border. Still, interesting.
This monster alone restricts your ability to special summon or use effects. Back in the day, this might have also been a card like Thunder King Ryo or King Tiger Wangu with...
Oh yeah, those guys.
Although they're not quite as popular anymore. And then they'll likely play...
Interesting, Burden of the Mighty, there is an alternative version of the card. Like, what was it? A continuous spell that was like... that looked like a router in a sense, that is basically way better because it decreases all the monsters on the field attack by 1,000. So if someone has a rounded attack number of like 3,000, they immediately drop to 0. And Fossil Dyna will drop 2, but at least he'll be at 200, which is still enough to beat over every monster in the field. It's a funny little thing.
Play a lot of back row cards. A mix of face-up spells like Dimensional Fissure, Necro Valley, Deck Lockdown maybe, and some set floodgate traps like the ones I mentioned at the start. Then we round it off with a card or two to protect it all. Solemn Judgment, Dark Bribe, a newer one is Iron Thunder, and a few bonus points.
Oh yeah, Iron Thunder. Really, no one's played that ever since it was introduced.
Mirror Shield, but also you might see something like Clockwork.
That one's kind of decent.
Battle of Golgonda,
oh yeah, that one.
Guardians.
Ooh, that one's a classic.
Deck. A low count of very high impact solo monsters and a lot of defensive back row cards, all meant to collectively say, sorry, you don't get to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Today.
Indeed.
Kind of an amorphous concoction that's always been around in Yu-Gi-Oh!, just changing and evolving and taking on new cards as they come out to keep up with the current metagame. Now,
yes.
I'm sure most people will agree when I say that these are some of the most unpleasant decks to sit down and play against in a tournament.
Yes, like I said, stun decks aren't really much fun, they're just more so wasting your time. But like I said, with something like Runic, where you're essentially going out of your way to build a deck to, defend yourself in the battle phase while also going out of your way to deck out your opponent, it can be fun. Just don't use Stunlock cards because Runic Stun is just so bland. It's like, yeah, let me just stop you from doing everything and just slowly and meticulously mill your deck. as opposed to, engaging with your opponent, trying to survive their attacks and either winning or losing. It all depends on what deck you're using and what deck you're facing off against as well. It's a weird thing, nonetheless.
The usual combos don't work, and unless you have the perfect set of outs, you're probably just shit out of luck. It feels unfair.
Yeah.
It feels uninteractive. It feels hostile in a very particular way, like the ultimate fuck you to the opponent and kind of to the game itself.
Because that's what stun cards were designed to do. They're a little middle finger flipping the opponent the bird and basically telling them deal with it. It's harsh, but at the exact same time, again, given certain negates, excessive cards, and the amount of prices that some of them are at, can you really blame people for playing these types of decks?
And I'll admit, I kinda sorta get where they're coming from. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so fast, so extreme, so polarizing, so far removed from whatever it used to be, that playing these stun decks kind of becomes a way for the disenfranchised player to voice their discontent with things. I mean, sitting through enough 10-minute combos.
Yeah, I guess you can say that too, yeah.
Affected nihilists, so why not just let it all burn? Neither of us gets
True,
fun. To
true.
be clear, I'm not personally endorsing it, just giving all sides their due. Now, if you ask me, I'd say that the stun deck is a more extreme version of a control deck, making a few choice trade-offs. Where control decks seek to slow down the opponent, disrupt them, and then out-resource them, stun decks instead bring the entire duel to a screeching halt. Not quite in the sense that they're stalling, more like they don't want you to be able to do anything at all while they slowly finish you off and force you to watch. Dare I say it's a bit sadistic, but they're not perfect. In fact, they're very much the opposite. On paper, it might seem like a deck that completely prevents the opponent from playing the game would be basically unstoppable and the perfect choice to bring to a tournament. I think a lot of us have flirted with the thought when we were getting into competitive play. It's tempting, right? All these crazy strong decks with their long combos and their unbreakable boards. Why not just say no to all of it? Even better, because stun decks are low maintenance. Once you're set up, you just pretty much get to sit and watch your opponent squirm or scoop. And yet, despite all of that, this style of stun deck actually isn't all that popular. Partly because people actually want to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And not just watch from the sidelines, but I digress. Historically, these decks have
Again,
always
it
been
depends
around
on
since
what
the
deck you're
past.
building.
They actually don't win very much. Sure, they're a miserable deck to face in the middle tables of a regional or something, especially when you're not prepared, but they're rarely the deck that actually ends up winning the tournament. Why is that? Well, I've always said that the best way to learn about a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is to play it yourself. So actually, I've done just that years ago. I saw the allure of it, so I built it. And it doesn't exactly take long to figure out why these decks aren't all they're cracked up to be.
Because they lack in a lot of offensive and damage dealing abilities. As much as they may be effective, 8,000 life points and several turns really does take a toll on people. And again, even though they have powerful cards, not much in terms of offensive damage or anything else. It's kind of like expecting ninjas to win with just playing pure ninjas. Not that they can't do it, but chances are their resources and materials would be wasted. Which is why something like, for example, Boral Sword Dragon is used in their deck because, hey, once I summon that fusion monster that says every ninja monster can attack directly, and Boral Sword Dragon with that with a certain equipped spell becomes a ninja monster, it's literally 6,000 damage to the face and an additional 2,500 from the last ninja fusion monster. It's literally a quick and easy blaze through the opponent's back row and just beat the shit out of them. You have to basically be prepared for this type of stuff. You know, offensive, defensive capabilities, and stun decks just basically tell you they're trying to stop you. But the problem is they're not actually fully stopping you, they're just limiting your options. It's not a full cease your, combative stuff and everything else until you get to the meta decks, in which case they have many resources, engines, and whatnot, and simply using several stun cards just makes them super powerful, because even if they don't have the ability to do their stuff, like they get Ash Blossomed or Called by the Grave or something like that, or Droll and Mockbirded, etc., etc. Once you get to the stuff that basically tells the opposing opponent to basically deal with it. It's basically like, what am I supposed to do? Just set up some stuff, basically bluff my way and end my turn. And from that point on, you just continue on and beat them that easily. Whereas pure stun decks just basically rely on defensive measures while making sure to stun your opponent long enough to basically make the difference in time and effort to basically win. Meta decks using stun cards basically make it so tedious and bland, it's basically very boring to face off against, where pure stun decks are just kind of a time waster. And even then, if you're playing something decent or have some interesting side options, it's not that difficult to manage. At all, even.
First of all, these stun decks are basically stretching the bounds of what it means to play Yu-Gi-Oh! You're telling your opponent that they can't do anything, but in doing so, you're actually imposing a lot of the same restrictions on yourself. So you get a very linear deck that has basically no room for lateral movement. Let's start with your opening hand. If you open with the exact combination of good monster plus way to protect monster plus floodgates plus solemn judgment, then congratulations, you're probably winning that duel. But here's the bad news. You have next to no control over that. Whereas other decks are usually using some kind of an archetype, and thus they get access to cert spells and extenders and other consistency cards and recovery, stun decks get no such thing. What you open with is what you're stuck with. Good or bad.
Exactly.
You might have a handful of spells and traps, but no monsters. You're probably only running like 6 of them after all. Or even worse, you see 3 or 4 or 5 monsters in your hand, but no way to protect them. That Fossil Dyna or Barrier Statue is great when it's got backup, but alone, not so much. Even if your
it easily gets decked.
What if they just normal summon and swing over?
And again, that's one thing you have to be aware of. They have not that high stats, and most people in competitive decks usually have monsters with decent or above average stats, so kind of a difficulty to basically manage to defend your arsenal, and that's why you'd better build your deck around said restrictions to basically maximize your output. Again, just pure stun decks are good, just not exactly enough to basically stop your opponent from doing stuff. You have to play around, strategize, and basically make the best option to basically beat the shit out of them. Otherwise, they'll just bounce back up and beat you. You have to think, and you have to manage your resources fairly evenly. Otherwise, if anything, you're just downplaying yourself. And like I said again, with meta decks being essentially much less costly and having way too many engines nowadays, it's like, well, why not just play a few stun cards? Could net me a win that way. It's kind of one of the reasons for why stuff like Fossil Dyna, Dimensional Barrier, and whatnot were basically played in the YCS now. I think Dimensional Barrier was mainly banned because it was in YCS so often. A lot of decks like Ryziel, stuff like that, use Xyz, Synchro, Fusion, monsters, and you basically say you can't use that, so deal with it. And considering the fact that they play a meta deck that basically allows for them to bypass that next turn and basically continue off from where they were stopped, can you blame them for basically playing that shit? Again, pure stun decks are just tedious and not that difficult to bypass. Pure meta decks with stun cards, on the other hand, is a completely different story. It's bullshit.
Over it. And on your next turn, you still just got a handful of monsters that are just as weak and helpless. At best, Inspector Border can kind of avoid this issue, but once again, you have no way to guarantee that you'll even see it. Either scenario is really rough. And it does not stop there. These decks have next to no comeback potential. Once a duel goes even slightly in your opponent's favor, there's just not a lot you can do about it. Swung over your one monster, you can't get it back, and you might not even draw another. Solemn cards and Iron Thunder can hold your opponent off for a while, but they'll just drain your life points really fast, and if you're not careful, or lucky, you can just die to a direct attack. I'm not even joking when I tell you that I've won games against stun decks in Master Duel by attacking them with a normal summoned Max Z because they paid so many life points, but never actually drew a monster. The best thing you can do is run cards like Pot of Extravagance, Desires, and Duality to hope to see enough raw cards to survive, but that's no guarantee either. Even worse if your opponent's savvy and just uses Ash Blossom on it. I mean, after all, these decks can't really afford to take one-for-one trades. Even using Time-Tearing Morganite is a really big risk because it's putting you down a card on the first turn in the hopes of future returns.
Yes.
A low-maintenance thing can be a drawback. Slowly poking for lethal damage with a barrier statue or a Fossil Dino alone actually gives your opponent several turns to potentially draw into the out that they need to pull the game from right out from under you.
Like I said, 8,000 life points is a long time to basically bypass, especially considering they can just set monsters in face down defense position and just kind of stall even harder. It's not ideal. Not at all.
And there are a lot of ways for that to happen. Harpy's Feather Duster, Lightning Storm, Evenly Matched, Raigeki, even just a well-timed Infinite Impermanence or Forbidden Droplet can give a regular deck that small opening it needs to turn things around and rush you down. The best thing you can cling to is that most people aren't main decking these outs, so you might get away with a win in game 1, but once that gets sided in, it's usually just curtains. A scenario I see a lot in Master Duel is just using Feather Duster, the stun player using Solemn on it, and then me following it up with a Lightning Storm anyway. They still lose everything, and now they're down to half their life points. And of course, there's the ever-present problem of going second in Yu-Gi-Oh! These stun decks are eating good when they get to go first. They set up, they sit back, they relax. But if any modern combo deck got to start the game, yeah, good luck. And don't forget, stun decks don't even get to run hand traps most of the time. Maybe Dimension Shifter, if anything. After all,
die cards already banned, thankfully, because god damn it, I need my graveyard. Stop banishing my cards, god damn it.
Those hand traps would conflict with Morganite and Dimensional Fissure, right? So your opponent's first turn is probably going completely unimpeded. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that nowadays, I actually kind of enjoy running into these sorts of decks on the Master Duel ladder sometimes. It's a break from the usual 10-minute combo, and they're a unique challenge that makes me have to use my own deck differently to counter it. They're a chore, but they're so linear and I'm so familiar with their weaknesses that it kind of makes a fun opportunity to just try to dissect them and sneak a win anyway. But back on topic. I say all of this not to try and make you suddenly sympathetic to the plight of this so-called poor, innocent stun player. Trust me, I know, it's an obnoxious strategy and I've still lost my fair share of them. All those weaknesses we talked about mean literally nothing if they just went first, got set up, and you didn't draw the out. But I say it instead to delineate between stun decks and the rest of the decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! They've got defined strengths, they've got exploitable weaknesses, and so, in my eyes, annoying as they can be, these strategies actually do have a place in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or at least they would if it stopped there. You might lose to the occasional stun deck at a tournament and be salty about it, but as we've established before, they're probably not the deck getting first place at the YCS. Hell, they're probably not even in the top cut. No, that space is usually reserved for whatever shiny new archetype Konami over-engineered in the lab to take your money.
Indeed.
That's, Snake Eye deck, the Malice,
like how he's acknowledging
the
too.
Tsurugi, the Yummy, whatever. So why are we even talking about these stun cards like Fossil Dyna and Barrier Statues when they're seemingly unrelated to those archetypes? Well, we established that all these floodgates and stun monsters are strong, but that the average stun deck has pretty clearly exploitable weaknesses, quite separate from the typical aggro or control deck.
I'm waiting for it.
What if there's a way for one of those typical Yu-Gi-Oh decks to make use of stun cards?
There we go.
Somehow impose their oppressive power on the opponent without incurring any of the drawbacks themselves. Conventional wisdom tells us that that's impossible, or at the very least impractical, right?
Conventional wisdom told us before it was impossible. Nowadays, with the amount of stuff they can pull off, it's very feasible. Very much plausible. No deniability or any counters or, backpedaling or even waste of resources. Just free lockdown. It's possible. It wasn't before, now it is.
Wouldn't a combo deck hate running a card like Fossil Dyna? They seem diametrically opposed after all. They have to special summon. A lot. Same with a card like Summon Limit or Anti-Spell Fragrance. Combo decks need to combo after all, and these cards would stop them from doing that. Well, for a pretty long time, that was more or less the case. These two strategies basically existed on separate sides of the train tracks. But as Yu-Gi-Oh! Card design has progressed and the capabilities of the average deck have increased,
aka making everything more available to every type of monster as opposed to being restricted and using archetypes with their own limitations,
the situation has changed. Let's start with a somewhat recent example that you might remember. Enter Nightmare Griffin. It's a Link 4 monster that, among other things, lets you set any spell or trap card from your graveyard. Now thankfully, you can't activate the spell or trap that turn, so it can't just be used to get you into something to continue your combo. Fair, right? Well, what if we used a card like, say, Curious, the Lightsworn Dominion, with its effect to send a copy of Summon Limit or Anti-Spell Fragrance straight from our deck to the graveyard? And then we use Nightmare Griffin to reset that card to the field. We finish the rest of our combo, ending with our usual Rogues Gallery of powerful boss monsters, and then we end our turn. Now on the opponent's turn, we flip up that trap. And voila, we got to do everything we wanted, and our opponent is now locked into the effects of the Floodgate card of our choice, powerless to stop it. But this time, it's not just a single barrier statue that they can normal summon a monster and swing over in battle.
Oh
It's
yes.
a wall of huge monsters, probably with their own
Complemented with a bullshit card in the end.
disruptions and omni negates. It doesn't
Like I said, regular stun decks, not so difficult, and depending on how you play it, easy to bypass. Meanwhile, if you have to deal with that shit, it's impossible. You've practically built an entire wall, and then you give them the extra fuck you on top to basically stop them from doing anything. Honestly, the best example I think would be Branded with the Puppet Lock deck. You know how Branded usually loves recycling their materials and whatnot and something like that? And eventually they released that one fusion monster that not only allowed for you to summon other monsters, but it also gave you the ability to summon a monster to the opponent's side of the field. Now, at first stuff, you're like, wow, so you get to summon a monster that they can just use as a material or resource that kind of blocks any damage for free. But then you certainly remember some cards that prevented you from special summoning monsters. Case in point, should I say it? It's probably gotten enough flack already, but Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. It was basically a card that for some reason restricted you from summoning other monsters except Gimmick Puppets, and it was in a deck that used Xyz monsters of all things. And, you know, it's a level 8 Dark Monster, a perfect material for some of the Branded fusion monsters. So what do? You use all the materials, summon all your fusion monsters, and then near the end, when you have that light fusion monster that can summon the materials for fusion monsters to the field, you summon your Albaz and then the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare onto the opponent's field during their turn. What happens? Gimmick Puppet Nightmare triggers. You're locked off of special summoning monsters other than Gimmick Puppets. Congratulations, you're royally boned and you can't do anything. In addition, your opponent has enough materials and monsters on the field to basically beat you the next turn. Yes, fair. Very reasonable. Very nice. Yeah, fuck you.
seem exactly fair. Now, to be clear, people have been doing this sort of thing since the dawn of time in Yu-Gi-Oh! Imperial Order is a great example. You use all your good spell cards on your turn, set Imperial Order, and then just flip it on your opponent when they start their turn.
Sure, yeah, that's
chill.
true.
But the difference now is that these powerful floodgates are effectively searchable straight from the deck. Remember how we said the stun deck?
Even worse, they are utilized in such bullshitty manner. It's like, actually not just that, it's also the fact that there are no restrictions on these decks nowadays. It's like, let's just make the stun cards more viable, and let's make every single opponent just summon whatever the hell they want for free without any cost. Like, it's ridiculous.
Doesn't have the luxury of influencing the cards that they draw. Yeah, Nightmare Griffin skips all that. And it doesn't end there. Heard of a card called Triple Tactics Thrust? If your opponent used any monster effect during your turn, you get to activate it and search for any normal...
I think it was reprinted in the new Branded Structure deck. Shame that deck costs like $50. No way am I giving that much for a fucking Branded deck. If it was a Structure normal deck that had those things, sure, but that many reprints for nearly double the price for a Structure deck? Nah, screw that noise. Not to mention some of the new artwork for some of the cards just looks weird. Like that one with the Dogmatica Ecclesia. It literally looks like it's ripped off from the anime's framework. Like literally just screenshotted from a trailer or something like that. It's weird. You'd think Yu-Gi-Oh! Would not do that type of stuff, and yet it's so obvious, it's not even a joke at that point. Literally, we can, actually I can search it up real quick. Dogmatica Ecclesia. Ecclesia. Alt art. If it could give me... Yeah, look at this. Look at this nonsense. What incarnation is that nonsense? Maybe a better image. On Reddit, sure, fine, whatever. Look at this nonsense. Look at this garbage. Probably I'm blocking the view from it. Just disappear for a second. Look at this. Look at this bullshit. This is the official alternate artwork for the card, Dogmatic Ecclesia. And this is a little still frame from the trailers that they have. Like, obviously there's some difference in the artwork. Like, you can see there's like more shine, and she's trying to match the original style from her card, but it's so plainly obvious it's the fucking image from this, just minimized and somewhat altered and just placed here with some more details. Like, look at this, even the background matches 1-to-1. Holy shit. I just noticed that. Just a little bit more shine here and there, but it's pretty much the exact same background. Like, talking about some major nonsense, huh? Anything else we can see for comparison? I don't know what those are, but yeah. Just total nonsense, man. And they expect you to pay double the price for a card that practically looks like that. Standards have dropped significantly in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's a fact.
Speller Trap card straight from your deck. Again, you can't necessarily activate the card that turn, but what if I told you that you don't have to? Let's say I'm playing another combo deck, pick whichever flavor comes to mind. You try to stop me with your Ash Blossom, your Effect Veiler, or a Mulch Army, whatever. Of course, my deck is strong and can probably just keep extending through most hand traps anyway, so I reroute and I finish my combo like usual. But just to add insult to injury, I add Triple Tactics Thrust and decide to set, say, Dimensional Barrier from my deck. You happen to be playing, say, Black Wings. Now, much like with the Nightmare Griffin example, I'm activating Dimensional Barrier on you, calling Synchros in this example, and that's kind of just lights out.
Yep.
Remember, it's not just the dimensional barrier that you're dealing with. It's my field full of big bosses too.
Yes.
Yeah, and all this happened because you did.
Like I said again, with Branded, it's the perfect example. Free monster locks you out of everything, and you have to deal with a board with multiple monsters that can interrupt you as well. Like, at the best, they'll have Dragoon, which is untargetable, undestroyable, can negate and increase its attack by 1,000 to make it a 4,000 beat stick. You have, of course, the fucking, what was it? The standard, you know, Mirror Jade. Yeah, Mirror Jade. It was Mirror Jade. It basically just banishes a card just by removing an extra deck monster from a fusion monster from your extra deck. Fusion Albaz something from your extra deck, which not only nets you a resource, but also is a free removal for almost no cost. And even then, when you destroy Mirror Jade, yeah, it's a free board wipe during the end of the turn. Yeah, great. As if I didn't have to work with these certain restrictions already. And even then, you still have some more nonsense that pretty much stops you in its entirety. Whatever.
Dared to try to stop me with your feeble Ash Blossom or Effect Veiler. You dared to try to fight back at all, tried to stop me from playing my Solitaire combo. Remember, stun decks don't really get to search Dimensional Barrier. Maybe they draw in their opening hand, maybe they don't. The combo deck only has to run a single copy because Thrust can get it for them. And if they don't see Thrust, no big deal. They've still got whatever powerful board their deck was normally going to end on anyway. The Dimensional Barrier was just extra. I mean, sure, a dedicated stun deck can try to run Thrust too, but part of the strategy of the stun deck is that the opponent will rarely be able to use a hand trap against it and trigger that Thrust because, well, they're summoning a single monster and setting some cards, and that's usually it.
Yes.
What's your Effect Veiler really going to do against that? And I hope you didn't think we were done. We still have monsters to talk about. Now, you may be thinking, surely a combo deck can't afford to summon Fossil Dyna of all things. Like we said before, they have to special
I don't know which one it was, but it can. It's bullshit.
summon, don't they? And wouldn't they at least need to use their normal summon to get started? They couldn't possibly waste it on summoning a barrier statue of all things. But that's where you'd be wrong. Introducing Gallant Granite and Infernal Flame Banshee. These two seemingly innocuous Xyz monsters have some pretty simple effects. Detach a material, search for a monster of a certain type to your hand. They're cut from the same cloth as cards like Gear Gigant X or King of the Feral.
Yeah, but in which decks were they used mostly?
Too, right? Well, not quite. Remember, Fossil Dyna is a rock monster, and that barrier statue of the Inferno is a pyro monster. So these Xyz monsters can just search them straight from your deck. But Paul, you say, the combo deck would still have to normal summon them, and they needed their normal summon to start their combo, right? Yeah, bad
Hit them with it.
Modern combo decks have actually evolved to a point where a lot of them don't need to commit to a normal summon.
Exactly. It's ridiculous. Remember when normal summons used to still be used for at least a certain monster to search you out cards to basically start off your combo? Nowadays, modern decks just basically don't even need that. Just free special summons out the wazoo. Normal summon doesn't even need to be used as often. It's like, hello, free normal summon of a stun card. No cost whatsoever. Nonsense, I tell you. Nonsense.
Ever heard of X-Ryziel, Mitsurugi Habakiri, Smith Engraver?
Oh yeah,
the list goes on and on with
some
monsters that
straight up
can create
nonsense.
entire boards on their own without a normal summon to their name. I've got plenty of complaints about this entire aspect of modern card design, but just to keep on topic, this means that a Mitsurugi Ryziel deck can go through all the motions, make its usual board of Murakumo, Ryziel Detonator, Hope Harbinger, and whatever other interruptions, all without using a single normal summon. And then top
At
it
all,
off
even.
with that single copy of Fossil Dyna that they grabbed from their deck earlier in their own combo. They pass to you, and you know the rest. And I know it's gonna sound like a broken record at this point, but one last time, I'm gonna ask you to recall what we said about stun decks. They summon Fossil Dyna too, sure, if they happen to draw it. So, with all that said,
See, one of the things I will defend stun decks for is that they're trying to use as many auto resources and creative ways to basically bypass these types of issues with the monsters being destroyed and basically try to use either regular stun cards or rather odd, trinkets to basically keep them safe and make sure they net other victories. Like, for example, with something like Waboku, an underrated card when it comes to the battle phase, is pretty dope because it's like, hey, you're gonna destroy my monsters? Psych, I play Waboku. My monster won't be destroyed, and even best of all, if you have anything that can destroy my monster if it's in defense position, or if you can deal double piercing battle damage with my favorite boy, Chaos Max, no. Waboku prevents all battle damage that I take, so I'm safe for the turn. And I'm gonna have to find my resources and scavenge through all my cards that I have to basically play around with this stuff again. That's one of the things that makes stun decks kind of meh in that regard, because you still have to play certain cards, resources, and materials to basically bypass all the stuff. It's weird, but at the exact same time, it's normal. Meanwhile, meta decks, on the other hand, even if you have some interruptions, chances are you would have wasted them, and all of a sudden, well, deal with this. Resources that you've wasted, and even if you have certain combo pieces, with now the meta being so focused on constant special summoning, even your normal summon is practically just a big fat joke.
I think you can begin to see part of the issue here. Stun cards are strong, but flawed. Any single stun card on its own, whether it's a monster, spell, or a trap, has weaknesses. And
exploitable
useful
weaknesses
for keeping the meta in check, but the problem arises when the already powerful, consistent meta decks can call on these stun cards and these stun deck options at will, reaping all the reward with none of the drawbacks. So we find ourselves here, with Fossil Dyna banned, Jalgan banned, barrier statues being picked off one by one. And sure, the competitors
it's
are
like
happy to see them go.
half of them already?
Probably sound like a floodgate apologist or something, but like I said at the start of the video, I don't particularly like these cards, and I totally see why people hate dealing with them. But
Yes, we know. The stun decks can be kind of frustrating and very bland to deal with, but again, if you have a way to use them properly, or for example, play a deck in a way that doesn't require that many stun cards, it's like, it can be fun. Not so much good, just fun. It depends, again, on how exactly you play stun decks. If you're playing it with the meta, it's not even at this point a stun deck, it's just meta with some extra lockdown features to basically stop your opponent from playing. I remember when this game was turn-based.
But there's still something about it that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. These cards are annoying, but they're getting hit not for being used in their own deck, but instead for the crimes of decks like Mitsurugi or Ryziel. These decks that are already more than powerful enough on their own and just abuse these stun cards as the sort of icing on top. I want to be clear here. Fossil Dyna Set 5 is not fun, not interactive, and not really much Yu-Gi-Oh! It could definitely be banned for that reason alone. But on the other hand, maybe we should also be looking a bit harder at the accomplices too. And believe it or not, I don't actually mean Gallant Granite or Infernal Flame Banshee. Heck, I don't even like that King of the Feral Imps had to get banned. No, I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, that's why it got banned.
Combos so hard.
Generic Lizard supported just got banned for that reason.
Maybe Konami should be making less engines that can start off of single cards, especially ones that don't even require committing to a single summon ever. Why is the Reveal Habakiri or Pitch Engraver a full combo on its own, forcing your opponent to activate Ash Blossom or risk facing down Murakumo or Desiree before your deck even gets to its real strategy?
Because before Ash Blossom even existed, a lot of people just kind of normal summoned, searched cards, and basically went off of their combos. It wasn't exactly the best, but they still built off something that prevented your opponent from playing, and then they had to work around it with one or fewer resources, kind of having to use other strategies to make ways with it. You know, nowadays it's just like, oh yeah, you have hand interruption, but guess what? I have a full-on stun card, so enjoy having your turn be stripped away from you.
And if you did, then you're opening yourself up to Triple Tactics Thrust for them to grab a card like Dimensional Barrier or Harpy's Featherstorm and just skip your whole turn regardless. And for that matter, where are the locks on any of these archetypes? Is it too much to ask for Mitsurugi to lock you into only summoning reptiles for the turn? Then there wouldn't be a Gallant Granite into Fossil Dyna or a Flame Banshee into the Bearer Statue of the Inferno. And Mitsurugi really is only one example of many. Anybody who's played Master Duel knows all about the 60-card pile slot combo decks and what those can do when they're left unchecked. I guess what I'm ultimately trying to say here is that I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Needs a bit of a give and take when it comes to balance. Believe me when I say I'm totally okay with us losing the Floodgate cards. A lot of them just didn't age well with the game, and we're probably going to need to go at some point regardless. I just want the actual floods themselves to maybe slow down a bit too, and maybe not just create new ones to replace the old ones the moment that the last cards get hit. I know, Konami, you gotta sell your new products and get your money, but like, duels can only take so much of this perpetual cycle before they just get burned out. I think there's also something to be said about how
it's not even fun anymore. It's just tedious.
Horseshoe theory. When the combo deck and the control deck, despite being at the end of the spectrum, aren't that much different from each other at the end of the day. After all, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game of war crimes and Konami is the arms dealer.
Huh?
But I digress.
How exactly is that?
Thanks for coming to my TED Talk on stun cards.
We're not in world.
I'm not gonna lie,
what?
I originally meant for this video to be
what kind of logic is that?
Dome reaction to the ban list, but then I got to thinking, and then I got to writing, and now we're here. So I really appreciate those of you who stuck around to the end. Hopefully this was a meaningful and fair discussion around the whole topic of these stun cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And why they had to get banned for better or worse. Of course, I'm sure you've all got plenty of thoughts on the whole situation too, so by all means, let's continue this discussion in the comments. And of course, thumbs if you liked it, sub if you loved it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Yeah.
Pass turn.
Pastor, thanks, I guess. Not so much war crimes about Yu-Gi-Oh, but still, it is kind of frustrating that at this point, meta cards are becoming way too expensive and way too overpowered. The regular decks, or just like casual decks, just get forgotten and buried under the sand. And you're gonna have to either compromise with playing some oddball decks or just kind of deal with it. It's, I don't know, it's weird. It's unfortunately how it is nowadays.